This is just the beginning.
Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual event, The Future of Autonomous Vehicles. I'm Joanne Muller. I'm coming to you from my home in Detroit, Michigan. I'm the author of the Navigate newsletter at Axios on the future of transportation. Welcome to our audiences who are tuning in from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and of course the Axios website. Special thanks really to Motional, who is our partner and sponsor for today's event. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be having 4 segments that look at some of the issues around autonomous vehicles and examine how they will affect our cities, our society, and our economy. You can follow along on Twitter with the hashtag Axios Events. And of course, our Twitter handle is @Axios. For all the breaking news, of course, you can also go to our website, axios.com. So our first guest today, I'm happy to say hello to Selika Josiah Talbott, who is a professor at American University and an expert in autonomous vehicle policy. So I'm really happy to have you here. Welcome, Selika.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm happy to be here as well.
Well, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about where we are at this moment in time. In some ways, it feels like autonomous vehicles are right around the corner, technology-wise, and yet somehow they feel far away as well. And it's really not only about the technology, is it? The question I have is society ready for autonomous vehicles?
And that's the real question here. While technologists are at the edge of fine-tuning the autonomous vehicles that will be on our roadway, we have to get down to brass tacks when it comes to the policies and the economic consequences that surround that use. How is it going to impact those who see transportation inequities today? Who gets an opportunity to use these vehicles? And how are the governments, cities, localities going to be impacted in their revenue once we see widespread use?
Well, those are all important questions that we expect to dive into today. Let me begin with I know you've worked for the state of New Jersey and for the federal government. And I'm very curious if you could talk a little bit about why at this point we still have sort of a patchwork of state laws and no real federal policy on autonomous vehicles.
Well, that is the political economy of autonomous vehicles. There are economic consequences to their widespread use. And at the same time, where's the will of the elected to impact this verging automation and disruptive, transformative technology? We have a patchwork because state by state, they have different implications for the use of their driver's license, for the revenue that these cities and governments get from our driving actions each and every day. When it comes to who should be acting and how they should be acting, we have a tug of war between localities and the federal government. Right now, the federal government says, we don't want to impact or impede innovation. We just want to make sure that it's done safely. But from one state to the next, we don't know who's driving these vehicles or having these vehicles on our roadway. We don't know the crash rate of these vehicles. And we need more transparency around their use.
Right. And someone could drive from New Jersey into another state, and whose laws apply? So these are some open questions still. Okay. Well, I look around, there are many states right now that are allowing autonomous vehicle testing to go on. But again, it seems like the communities that they're in are not particularly well informed about what's happening. You may see a car go by with some crazy equipment on it, but you don't know what's happening, right?
I've seen it here myself in Northwest Washington, D.C., with a vehicle with LiDAR, all kinds of contraptions on its rooftop circling the area. I'm in the industry. I know that they're mapping, but my next door neighbor doesn't know that. And so one of the things that we have to grapple with, both in government and the technologists and original equipment manufacturers, is how are we bringing the general public along as we fine-tune this technology? We don't have PSAs out there. We're not informing the general public of what is happening in their neighborhoods and in their community, and the wider scale of how they will personally be impacted by autonomous vehicles.
Well, the surveys show that people are kind of afraid of them still, right? So what it should be the policy? How do we get people to even understand and begin to trust this technology?
Well, in some ways, they have every right to be concerned, whether it's the 80,000-pound truck moving down the highway with no driver behind the wheel, or your bus that's traveling on your local city roadways. And government and manufacturers have an opportunity now, before we're in widespread use, of saying to the general public, this is what we're doing, this is how we're testing, and here are the benefits to the general public. Here's how we can positively transform society by pushing and encouraging this technology.
Well, that's a great point. And I get worry, and I'm curious, how do we make sure that autonomous vehicles don't just become a toy for rich people?
Well, we do now have somewhat of the have and have nots when it comes to transportation. Whether you're in a rural environment or an urban environment, people have significant transportation inequities. How do they get to regular maintenance appointments with their healthcare provider? How do they access good food? How do they get to their jobs? The doctor could be 50 or 100 miles away if you're in a rural environment. Or if you're in the city, how are you getting to the best job possible or accessing healthy food? Autonomous vehicles can fill that gap. So it is up to government to step in. Again, the will of the elected to say, fine, we're bringing this new technology on, but we need to make sure that we invest in our communities, whether urban or rural, to make sure that this is not just a toy for the rich, but a way to create equity across society.
Do you think that the companies that are developing this technology are doing enough to educate the policymakers?
Well, we're at a point right now where in Washington, there's a lot of conflict on either side of the aisle. And so we have to get past that as an industry, no matter whether you're talking to the right or to the left, to explain the benefits both from an economic standpoint and the benefits from a social standpoint. We need to do more. We need to invest both as technologists, as social change agents, when we're looking at climate change, when we're looking at sustainable food, when we're looking at healthcare. It's not, frankly, up to just the original equipment manufacturers. It is up to all the industries that will be impacted by the use of autonomous vehicles in a widespread fashion.
Mm-hmm. So achieving that buy-in really is an education effort, it seems to me, right? What kinds of things are we seeing happening on the ground that are helping to get our policymakers educated so that they can then see how the changes can impact society and then put the proper policies in place?
Well, we've started to see associations and groups across the country, whether it's the American Trucking Association or DC Autonomous Vehicles Association or PAVE, which is the Partnership for Education when it governs autonomous vehicles. We're starting to see a coalescence in these communities and in these associations to addressing government and a government in turn addressing the general public.
You talked about the federal government's reluctance to interfere with innovation. But don't you think that companies would appreciate a little guidance on, where the laws are likely to go so that they can, direct their technology in a certain way. It seems to me like there's some safety issues if we don't put any guidelines in place.
We need guidelines. Right now, it's like the Wild West. We need bumpers in place so we don't have rogue agents testing vehicles on the roadway and possibly causing harm to the general public.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, we've seen that there has been a fatality in Arizona in the past, a couple of years ago. And have you seen any change in policy since then to be a little more coordinated in our efforts, or is it still the Wild West?
Well, we have seen the safety assessments that the federal government has encouraged automation technologists to buy into. And so there is some transparency in that realm. But with 37,000 plus deaths a year, we know that automation has the opportunity to address the distractions that we see in driving on the roadways every day and create an improved life for us.
Well, I really appreciate it very much. Selika, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us a little bit about what's going on in policy. Now I'd like to kick it over to Axios CEO, Jim Vandehei.
Thank you very much, Joanne. It's now my pleasure to have a conversation with Carl Janyema, who is the president and CEO of the freshly unveiled Motional. Thank you, Carl, for doing this. Tell us about the name Motional and about the purpose and the origin story.
Sure. Well, in March, Hyundai Motor Group and Aptiv announced a joint venture in autonomous driving. So I'm thrilled to unveil the joint venture today as Motional. Motional's purpose is to make autonomous vehicles a safe, reliable, and accessible reality, and ultimately change how the world moves. The name, comes from motion, refers to the products we're building, but also emotional. Whether we like it or not, transportation decisions have become emotional decisions. Deciding how you're going to get from point A to point B safely is an emotional decision. So that insight is going to be the center of every product we build at Motional.
And you and I were talking the other day, and you mentioned that you've been in the field studying how people think about autonomous technology, autonomous vehicles, and how their attitudes might have changed because of the coronavirus and our new reality. Talk about that. What did you find and what surprised you the most?
Well, when COVID struck, my belief was that people would more than ever understand and appreciate the value of a driverless experience, not having to share space with an individual that you may not know. So we went out and asked people. We talked to over 1,000 people in the US, and what we found was pretty striking. 70% of people told us that risk of infection had a significant influence on their transportation decisions. About 1 in 5 people we talked to, 19%, were more interested in experiencing driverless technology than they were pre-pandemic. So that tells me that what we're building at Motional is more relevant and more important than ever.
And do you think when you sort of slice the data, is it because it's mainly from that health fear, the idea that we now know that proximity to other people, whether it's this virus or the next virus or even the flu, that people just have a new awareness of that you think will outlast the virus?
I think it will. I think the influence can't be underestimated. It's really changed how we at Motional think about safety. Prior to the pandemic, safety was only about avoiding crashes. And now we understand it's about avoiding crashes. It's also about minimizing the risk of infection.
And what other things can you do to make the person in the car feel safe? You're right, this new type of safety, right? This sort of health safety, not crash safety. Like, are there things that you might have to do with ventilation systems or other technologies that you had to do in the past?
Well, there's certainly a technical dimension of ensuring that the environment is safe and sanitary. But what we found in Las Vegas, in Vegas, we operate what we believe is the world's largest open to the public autonomous mobility service. We've given over 100,000 rides to members of the public. What we have found is that if you can get people in a car and then deliver a trip that is confident, comfortable, and safe, and ultimately feels like a human-driven ride, then people will feel comfortable, and that will lead to adoption of the technology.
And for those that don't marinate in the topic or aren't in the industry, give me your perspective on like when will autonomous vehicles, autonomous technology be so ubiquitous that it's touching people's lives on a daily basis? Like, give us your crystal ball and what you see happening as you unveil Motional.
It depends where you are, Jim. I mentioned Las Vegas, where we've given over 100,000 rides. So if you're a resident of Vegas, you've seen our cars. You've probably ridden in one of our vehicles. Other cities, the technology would come a little bit later. Our plan at Motional is to deploy our technology in cities to match the technical maturity. So we're going to go in places where we can safely and confidently drive. The more complex environments, Times Square at rush hour, that will come a little bit later. But in some cities, autonomous vehicles are here today.
And I had an interesting conversation the other day with the CEO of Qualcomm, who was saying that because there's fewer people in the streets and because people need more capacity, that they've been able to speed up a 5G, which I assume is instrumental in a lot of these cities to being able to have the autonomous technology work. Are things moving faster? Do you think that because of the virus and some things that happened as offshoots of it, that autonomous technology and vehicles will be more of a reality quicker for more people?
Well, we're having a lot of conversations with cities that we maybe wouldn't have had, a few months ago. I think access to a diversity of transportation options is more important than ever for the general public. Cities understand that autonomous mobility, for all the reasons we've talked about, the ability to deliver a safe and sanitary ride, this will be an important transportation option for everyone. Cities understand that. They want to deliver that for their residents.
And to you, like looking into the future, like 5 years from now, Motional will be a huge success if what? Like, what are the things that you're obsessed about? What are the things that you're measuring yourself, your company by?
We're already seeing a fair amount of consolidation in the autonomous mobility space. Really, to be successful, you got to have three key ingredients. You've got to have the ability to develop smart software. You've got to have the ability to partner with an automotive manufacturer so you can build the systems at scale. And you've got to have access to capital. $1 billion is the price of entry in the autonomous mobility space today. So Motional has those three things. I feel great about how we're positioned today. Going forward, one of the things we have that most of our competitors don't is a great international footprint. We're not just in North America. We have a strong presence in Asia, in Singapore, quickly growing in Seoul, in Korea. And that's going to be very valuable for us as we look to deploy to markets. We'll have flexibility based on that broad footprint.
In thinking about the U.S. in particular, if things don't move as fast as you hope they will or you think they will, what do you think the big reason will be? What will slow this down more than necessary?
Well, the regulatory environment is evolving in the U.S. I'm optimistic. We have ongoing conversations both at the city, state, and federal level. So I think we'll get to a place where we have uniformity of regulation. But that's one thing that could stand in the way of deployment in the U.S. is if we don't get that issue resolved.
And if I'm just sort of a passive consumer kind of interested in autonomous vehicles, what cities should I watch? Which cities should I study to see what the future looks like?
Well, I'm partial to where we are. Where we are for good reason. We're here in Boston, where I'm talking to you today. Great city for innovation. We're in Pittsburgh, one of the hubs of robotics and autonomous vehicles in the country. And we're in Vegas. If you want to experience autonomous vehicles, there's no better place than Vegas.
Carl, we're gonna, as we wrap up, a lot of aspiring leaders watching this. What have you learned about leading in the coronavirus times? Is there like one hack or one thing you do differently now than you might have done 4 months ago that might be helpful to someone tuning in?
Wish there were a hack. I don't think there is, Jim. I don't think there's any substitute for communication, over communication, and just a lot of hard work to ensure that everybody's doing okay, feeling okay, has the tools that they need in order to continue to make progress.
Carl, congratulations on Motional. Thank you for making this conversation possible. Thank you for sharing that survey data. We appreciate it. And back to you, Joanne.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our next guest, Helen Witty. She is the National President for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Helen, welcome to Axios.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about autonomous vehicles. I know that the issue of drunk driving is very personal for you. You lost your own daughter to a drunk driver. And sadly, this is something that you are not alone on. And I wondered if you could share with us just how much of a problem drunk driving is in America.
Yes, it is the number one killer on our roads. It kills, in 2018, it killed 10,511 people and injured 300,000 or more. So it is just a horrible crime that MAD has been working since our founding 40 years ago to put an end to. We want to stop the killing.
Yes. Well, so do you think autonomous vehicles will be able to help? I mean, after all, they don't get drunk, they don't do drugs, right?
Right. No, that's true. And absolutely, they will be able to help. When we remove driver behavior from cars, that's going to eliminate drunk driving. So we see that potential at MAD. Absolutely. It's futuristic. It's maybe decades away. And what we're excited about is that while this wonderful autonomous vehicles, while they are being developed, the technology is growing, and what is being developed now can save lives now. We know that technology exists to end drunk driving now. And that's what we're excited about. And yes, we love the idea of autonomous vehicles as long as they're safe, deployed safely. But what we want to say to everyone, to the country, is that we have technology now that can save lives today. On Capitol Hill, MAD has been working very hard in the House, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and Chairwoman Jan Schakowsky in the House. That has passed. We have legislation there that has passed that will mandate drunk driving technology, to end drunk driving technology in all cars. It's now in the Senate, and Senator Tom Udall, along with Senator Rick Scott, are working on that. So we're very hopeful that it will also pass the Senate and save lives. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has done research. Just last week it came out that this technology in all cars, standard, can save 9,400 lives annually.
So you're talking about, for our audience, let's be clear, you're talking about a driver assistance technology. We call it ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. These are basically the building blocks, right, for autonomous vehicles. And it's everything from automated cruise control, lane keeping assist, automatic emergency braking, as well as an in-car monitoring system that can look at the driver's eyes and their behavior and know whether or not they're paying attention, right? So how do you see driver monitoring in particular affecting the ability to curb drunken driving?
Yes, the driver monitoring systems that have been developed on the way to autonomous vehicles are already in vehicles. We know that in Europe, with the European NCAP, which is the Car Assessment Program, that by 2025, that technology, the driver monitoring system, so it's looking at the driver in real time. And are they looking at the road? Are they staying in the lanes? Are they driving the car, irresponsibly? Then it can take action to assist. I have a friend with a new Subaru and she can't look down. I always say that. She says, it beeps at me. And I said, well, you shouldn't be looking down. You should be looking at the road. So that's the thing that we're excited about.
So what we're talking about here is technology that will alert the driver that you need to pay attention. And do you know, there are some systems that are would actually bring the car to a stop if the driver does not respond. But what about locking out the driver entirely from the vehicle, such as breathing into a tube or other technologies like that? Can those be done automatically and proactively?
Not that I'm aware of. Matt is not the techie or the engineer. We just know that technology exists, and we want to be technology neutral. We want the technology that best saves lives out there to be able to put on the cars to save 9,400 lives. There's so many different ways. I would like to see them work in concert. You know, I've also heard there's technology that can recognize a pedestrian and puts on the brakes. So wouldn't it be wonderful that they could all work in concert and you know, actually not even start the car? What you're talking about, blowing into a tube, is the ignition interlock device, which we have now, which is punitive. That's if a person is arrested for drunk driving, they must have an ignition interlock installed in their car. This other technology would be passive. You wouldn't know it was there unless there was a problem.
Mm-hmm. And I have heard about some systems not only that can detect the ambient breath of the driver in the driver's seat, but also check the blood alcohol level through the fingertips on the steering wheel. So all of these technologies would certainly help. So I think your point is that we have the building blocks for autonomous vehicles, but let's make them mandatory now to save lives, right?
Right. Let's make the ones that prevent drunk driving. That's where Mad's focus is. Use them. We know that they're there. We know they exist. We've spoken to the people who are doing the technology, and it's just frustrating if I have to meet one more family who has lost a loved one to this horrible crime, you know, traumatically and violently. We don't want one more. We want to stop it. So, and we know that we can do that, and that's what this bill on Capitol Hill is saying. We can do this by 2025.
So what are the chances of it passing? You mentioned that it's passed the House, now it's in the Senate. What kind of timetable do you think? How quickly could it get passed?
Well, we're very hopeful it will be soon. We know it's part of the highway bill, so we're hopeful it will be soon. We're very excited about this. Just imagine the number of lives, the families that will remain whole. So that's what we want to hold on to.
Mm-hmm. Helen, do you see the day where you and I can meet up and go out for cocktails and not have to worry about driving home drunk? I mean, what will that experience be like?
That would be a beautiful day. That would be a beautiful day. Yes. Let's. In the meantime, we want people to behave responsibly and not drive after drinking. If you drink, don't drive. If you drive, don't drink. But until that day, let's get this technology that we know works. But thank you. Yes, absolutely. You're on.
Well, I hope that date isn't too far in the future. I would like to see that happen soon, but we'll see. In the meantime, as you say, there are things that can be implemented today, and they can save lives, not just from drunk driving, but from all kinds of distractions. So we really need to.
Drowsiness, yes.
All right. Well, Helen Witty, National President of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, thanks so much for joining us today. We enjoyed having you on.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having us at MAD.
Our next guest from Los Angeles is the head of the general manager of the Department of Transportation in Los Angeles, Seleta Reynolds. Seleta, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Joanne, my pleasure.
Great. Well, it feels like autonomous vehicle technology is coming really fast, but I often wonder if cities are ready for it. So I'd love to hear what LA is thinking about the advent of the self-driving car age.
Sure. So I started this job in 2014, and that was the year that all of the OEMs and everyone who's working on an AV stack was saying that 2021 was going to be when we were going to have fully autonomous level 5 vehicles roaming around our streets and our freeways and the region and the country. And so we sharpened our pencils and got to work to try and understand what that would mean and what it would mean for both things like our municipal budget, if, say, we didn't collect parking tickets and those kinds of things because robots don't break rules, all the way to what it would mean for our system of giving drivers information about what to do and how to behave when they're on the road. So things like stop signs and traffic signals, those are designed to communicate with an individual human driver imperfectly, but that's what they're designed to do. What would we need to do if there was no human driver? I have 600 traffic officers that direct traffic, crossing guards that help students get to school. They already experience firsthand what a driverless car looks like because they see how little attention human drivers are paying to the road when they're trying to get across those intersections. And they're worried, what will that mean if there's no human there at all? So we started to do that work. And what I discovered was the prevalence of something that Liza Dixon has called autono-washing, which is sort of the, objects in mirror are actually farther away than they appear, that all of the hype and sort of the pressure on cities to get ready for autonomous vehicles maybe was a little bit overblown, and a way of potentially having auto manufacturers and other folks who are getting a lot of VC funding to both continue getting that funding and also to work really hard at the federal level and even the state level to preempt cities out of being able to influence or have a role in the creation of regulations for autonomous vehicles. And so, our work here has really focused on how do we prepare for a future where we may or may not have a say in how those vehicles function on our roads. How do we make sure we are still managing the public right-of-way for the public good? And how do we make sure that we do everything we can to nudge those good actors in the marketplace to solve real problems, to solve the problems that I encounter every day as a general manager of LADOT? So we published a document called Urban Mobility in a Digital Age, which laid out a series of actions. And we went to work, and we've had some successes, and we've had some failures, and we've had some partners and champions, and we've had some pushback along the way. All of that makes me think that we are on the right track.
Well, that's great. I'd love to hear about some of those lessons that you've learned, because I think other cities can obviously learn from what LA is doing. What were some of the mistakes? What were some of the good things you learned?
So I think there's a couple of things there. One of the biggest challenges we have in the city of LA every year is safety. So around 250 people die on the streets that LADOT manages and operates on an annual basis. Half of those people are people walking and biking, the most vulnerable users on the street. And about half of our most dangerous streets are in low-income communities of color, where there haven't been investments for many decades, or where we've laid down freeways and created a freeway mentality on the city streets that run adjacent to those roadways. And last year, AAA came out with a report that said that pedestrian detection systems and automatic braking systems did a really poor job of detecting adult pedestrians. They only were successful at avoiding crashes with adult pedestrians about 40% of the time, and that only when the car was going only about 20 miles an hour. and they completely failed almost completely in avoiding crashes with child pedestrians, with shorter and harder to see and detect pedestrians who are walking, and especially at night. Traffic crashes are the number one cause of death for kids in LA County. So that was a really clear, message to me that if we were going to tackle real problems, we would need to start applying the sort of digital transformation to our own infrastructure. Because what I was worried about was a repeat of what happened in the 1910s and 20s, when instead of designing vehicles to not kill people on foot, we created a bunch of jaywalking laws in this country to criminalize walking. And so we've been working on a system of proactive pedestrian detection in a signal system around our red line, around the metro red line stations, where we have high numbers of people walking and also high numbers of people getting injured and killed. So our lesson learned from working for 4 or 5 years with auto manufacturers and software creators and US DOT is that we probably wouldn't be able to rely on autonomy to solve pedestrian safety. And instead, we would need to take those kinds of things back into our own hands and bring some of the same intelligence and nimbleness that we were seeing in the private sector into our own work in the way we were designing and delivering the traffic signal systems that the public pays for and that we operate and that we hold in the public trust.
Well, a lot of people have asked me whether it makes sense for dedicated AV lanes in cities. What is your feeling on that?
I'm not sure what problem that actually is going about solving. We have tremendous congestion in LA County, and I have a lot of concerns as we rebound from the pandemic and the severe economic consequences that it wrought. That we're going to see an increase in traffic. In fact, we're already seeing an increase in driving, particularly in low-income Black and Latinx neighborhoods, because they lost their jobs in the entertainment or restaurant industries, and now they've gone to driving for Instacart and Amazon, et cetera. So as that traffic congestion comes back, I'm not sure that a bunch of AV lanes on a freeway is going to help solve it. What instead I think it will do is continue to privilege people who can either afford to purchase their own AVs or who can afford to pay for a company that operates a fleet to send those AVs to pick them up and move them around. And if what we're going to do is solve the problems of a privileged few, we're going to completely fail on the bigger problems that we have at hand around climate and inequities.
Well, you bring up such an important point. We don't have a lot of time left, but I am curious about automation in buses, for instance, or other shuttles or paratransit, things that can be used to help people who really need transportation and don't have access today.
I think that is a really interesting area of inquiry, because if you take the bus, you know that the transit operator does so much more than actually operate that vehicle. They give people a break on their fare if they're a nickel short. They help people get on and off if you have a disability, or if you're a mom with a stroller. They de-escalate conflicts. They address medical emergencies when they arise. And if we're able to layer automation into those vehicles in such a way that it both solves for the huge blind spots that bus drivers have, so it improves actual safety outcomes, and then frees them up to be trained to do even more of those kinds of community functions that are really helping everybody that needs a bus to get around town. Those are the kinds of things that I think autonomy can be a pathway to actually getting at real problems and retain those really great middle-class jobs that exist for people who are helping folks get around town and navigate our cities. I don't know of very many companies that are actually focused on that problem. And that's another example of an area where, if DOT commissioners ruled the world and wrote the work plans for AV companies, they probably look really different.
Well, there's a lot of exciting uses for this technology if we do it right, I think. So very happy to hear what you're doing in LA. Thank you so much for joining Axios today, and good luck with the work you're doing as you go forward.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
And thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us this afternoon. If you liked this conversation and you'd like to have more Axios content, I'd encourage you to sign up for my newsletter, Navigate, which comes out on Fridays, or any of our newsletters at signup.axios.com. I'd also really like to thank our sponsor today, Motional, for helping put on this event. And I'd also encourage you to check out our podcasts. We have 2 new podcasts, Axios Recap in the afternoon, all the business news you need, and Axios Today in the morning. Thank you again so much for joining. So long.